often with communities in the Pacific, you would want to be talking to a village elder, or, you know, so you're kind of getting two levels of consent. Can we come into your community and, you know, talk to people about this? And then if they allow it, then you're going to be directly trying to recruit people to do your interviews or whatever. So this is a case of, you know, you really need to know your local customs and, you know, be very aware of, you know, maybe would you interact differently with women, or would you interact, you know, if you wanted to speak to children, what would be the sort of cultural rules around that?
The very best research projects within in the Indigenous space, certainly in Australia, are ones that are guided by the IACPIR code, and it spells it out very clearly. And principle 1 is Indigenous leadership. So if you're wanting to do research with Indigenous people and don't have an Indigenous researcher on your research project, then the committee is going to be wondering why. Because that's kind of almost the standard these days. Certainly, if you were going to IACPIR's Human Research Ethics Committee, that would be expected. And most of the people on a project would be expected to be Indigenous. So, you know, that's kind of something to think about, I guess.
We did have a question from Rodrigo. I did ask him if he wanted to ask it himself, but I'm not sure.
I saw that. Is that about the table
yeah.
in the protocol?
Yeah.
We don't have it as a separate document, but you're welcome to download the protocol and pull that page out if you want to do it as a separate item. We used to have it at the end of the document, and just recently we moved it up to sort of in the middle, so after your aims and everything, as a way of just alerting people, because it depends how your brain works. I find the table very helpful as a snapshot. We're doing 3 things and this is how we're going to do it. You are welcome to cut and paste that into a section down below or attach it as a separate document. If you're doing a very simple project with just one method, you don't have to do the table. The table's not compulsory. It does help us. Me in particular, I don't. That's how my brain works. And the other question: how flexible is the project description template, and how much can I adapt it? Most of the topics there we do need to know about. There's some sub-points in there that might not apply to your project, but if you think about it, we need that flow of information. Why are you doing it? What are your methods? Who are you going to recruit? How and why? How are you going to get their consent? What are you going to ask them? Risks and benefits, data collection and analysis. So you can see the protocol template runs through the story like you would run through it in reality. So most of the topics there we do need, but of course, there's some flexibility. It's all largely depends on the project.
Yeah, I agree with that. The project description and protocol, of course, is the core document of any research. The ethics application is how you communicate and justify what you're doing for the committee to get approval. In many ways, I still think that the project description or protocol document is the most important document of all, really, and that's the one that should be changed in response to any peer review feedback or Human Research Ethics Committee feedback or granting body feedback. So that's really the core of the project. So if you change that, then that's when you need to put in an amendment because the committee for your need to know of any changes. So it's pretty significant, I think. Yeah.
Just a random, just made me think.
Yeah.
The HREA online form, it will ask you a lot of questions that you've covered in your protocol. say there'll be a question, how am I going to recruit participants? Please feel free, if you have answered that in your protocol, to say, see section 5.3 of protocol. Having said that, don't answer every question like that, because sometimes you actually haven't answered the specific question. So do put a lot of, some thought into, if you're saying see section, whatever, have you actually answered that question in your protocol? If not, maybe answer it in the form. What is tricky for us is if you suddenly start cutting and pasting long chunks of text into each question in the form. You can imagine for us as readers, we reading the same thing 10 times. If you've said it, point it out to us.
Yeah.
If
And
so,
always change your
that's
protocol. Good research practice is always to maintain the protocol as what you do.
Yeah.
Or the description.
Yeah. Because that's the full story.
Yeah. And I always go to the protocols first to see what's happening.
Yeah.
Now other people do different things, but I was reviewing these applications at a time when there was really a very limited form and all you had was the protocol. And it in fact is the protocol or the description of the project, the research itself is what we're reviewing. You know.
Sometimes, oh, sorry.
You go.
Sometimes there's been a bit of questions too lately about confirmation. Do you have to do confirmation first before you can apply for ethics? We don't have a set rule. It really depends on the project. In most cases, you probably would have done your confirmation first, because that's a review of the research merit and your methods and everything as well. And then you'd frame your ethics application around that. We don't mind for your literature review background aims part of your protocol. You can often just sort of take a piece of your confirmation document potentially. But the nuts and bolts of your ethics, who you're recruiting and how and why in the template headings, we do need that separate information. We used to accept confirmation documents, but we were finding that it didn't actually answer the ethics questions. So we really prefer that our template gets used. And in fact, the template for the protocol is actually the NHMRC template that's linked to the portal. So they've kind of come up with that. And I've just tailored the instructions at the top to suit us. So.
Yeah, Dr. Kundra just added, when Andrew was talking about working with Indigenous people. So in Fiji, I think she's sort of asking, if working with Australian Indigenous communities, do we have additional approval? Because I'm just about to go to Fiji. I've just had to go through that process of writing to the Ministry of Aituki Affairs to get approval to go to enter into communities. So I think she's kind of asking, in Australia, do we have an additional level?
Yeah, in Australia, you're expected to apply the IATSIS code and the NHMRC guidelines. Generally, in the end, if you're going certainly to remote Indigenous communities and even urban ones, of course, you need authorisation from that community, and you need evidence that there has been engagement and that community, those people are happy to be part of the research. Now, often that could be a letter, a signed letter from the local land council or local Indigenous members or whatever, but you kind of need that authorisation. And in the, I always say that the ethics committee process is important, but in the end, what's most important is that committee are willing to authorise this research. Yeah, so that's kind of the view that the committee take here, and pretty well most everywhere else, I think, in Australia. Yeah, and overseas too, with the other Indigenous groups.
So, Andrew,
yeah.
I mean, this approval that you're saying, in particular in Australia, if you were to work with a remote Indigenous community, you would need that formal approval from that actual community. But I guess that's not part of the actual ethics process. It's something you would do in addition to your ethics.
I think I call it authorization because, you know, just to separate it from, you know, the ethics approval process. For example, you can have an approval and you might go to a community and they may say, no, we don't want it, or they've changed their mind or whatever. And that's, to me, that stands pretty high if people are saying no. The ethics committee will want to see that that community is supportive of your research project before they approve it. But in the end, I mean, it's about good reciprocity, good connection, good engagement, and making sure that, you know, people are really happy to be part of this. And generally they are, you know. There's so much good research at USC that, you know, in the Indigenous space, you know, where people are fully engaged with the communities. Likewise in Fiji and overseas, we get some great projects, you know, as you know. It's fantastic. Yeah. So it's not a formal separate process in a sense. It's more, you know, that engagement. It's part of the whole process.
So with Indigenous research, like Andrew said, the committee would want to see that letter of support, you know, but when we say about other approvals, it depends on the project. Like just a real simple one. Say you're going to an event at a university campus to recruit students there. We would say to you, make sure you have approval to do so before you just turn up. That's not something we would need to see a letter of support or something official for. So it depends, but definitely with the Indigenous research, that's standard now that we would see something ahead of time. You know, things that are in the middle, say, it might not apply for this group, but Education Queensland, they have a process in tandem with us. So they're getting ethics approval with us. They're also getting approval to research in schools through Education Queensland. And those things can happen at the same time. And researchers would usually say, yeah, we know we need to do that process. And we're happy knowing that they're getting their other approvals in addition to ours.
And I guess with everything you've both said, if for the Australian students here today who are potentially going to travel to another country for research, you would expect the same sort of information and engagement to be, you know, provided in our ethics applications as well. Yeah. I mean, oh, sorry. I was going to say, with my research project for my PhD, I mean, I am obviously an Australian, but I will be traveling to a variety of different countries in the Pacific Islands. And I'm not necessarily planning on working with a specific Indigenous community, but obviously I will be visiting different communities. And I've sort of set up a project advisory committee with my project. So local people from the community, from the country, who advise me on the language and the approaches and just the methods and everything like that to kind of help counteract some issues as well, or challenges that I could face. Would you say that that's sort of something in addition that's a good suggestion, or maybe I'm on the wrong track?
So if you're doing research with Indigenous peoples, then you probably, is there an Indigenous person on your advisory group?
Yeah, I'm not going to, well, we haven't actually set it up yet, and we don't know the specifics of what communities we'll be visiting yet or who we'll be working with. But the plan is whoever we will be visiting, that people from that community will be part of that project advisory committee. So we'll ask for their permission if they would like to be part of it, and therefore to help work through the actual methods of the project to make sure that they're happy with that for their community.
Yeah, that sounds like engagement.
Good.
Yeah, sounds good. So something that can get into gray area also with Indigenous communities is you're working with them, you're consulting to develop the project, but you're not recruiting them for the ethics just yet. And that can be confusing. And I think we've had instances, and not just within Indigenous communities, but, you know, where people might interpret that consultation as recruiting. So you just need to be careful there, like with your language, you know, help us develop the project. You know, we want to work with you so that you're not seen to be recruiting your participants yet, but you're consulting.
Yeah, definitely, Angela. I think that's a really good point. Thank you.
Yeah. And advisory groups are often a strategy that a lot of researchers are going with these days. You're getting a group of like elders or, you know, respected people in a community, in different communities even, to advise on some of the cultural protocols and so on.
Yeah.
And making sure you understand them and respect them and so on.
Yeah, and I guess to help hold you accountable as well, to kind of pull you up at some point and say, hey, no, this isn't quite what we talked about or where we want to see this going. So
yeah,
cool. It's really important conversations we've been having. To change the topic a little bit, there is a question in the chat from Rodrigo again. He's just asked, who is responsible for sending the project description document to the peer review? Can I do it myself, having supervisors in copy? Do we need to send only this document or data collection tools and others?
Yeah.
So the peer...
You go, Angela.
Oh, sorry. The peer review checklist does have some instructions on it. What we would envision is that you do your application, the full package, and in the HRA system, it shoots you out a zip bundle that has everything in it. And ideally, you would just send that bundle to the peer reviewer with the form. Here's my full documents so they can see everything. If your peer review recommends pretty substantial changes, you might have to go in and create a new version. And we've also got instructions on the form to do that. The students are welcome to send it to the peer reviewer themselves, but as a general rule, we would hope that the supervisors are always copied into emails. So something that can be a bit of a red flag for us in the team is if students are directly engaging with us a fair bit and they're never copying their supervisor in, that sometimes makes us a bit nervous, like, are they actually, does their supervisor know what's happening? Is everyone on the same page here? So we just like to see that everyone's in the loop through kind of all the stages. Obviously, if you're just calling us quick questions or wanting advice, that's fine. But you know, when you're getting to that part of submitting, responding to feedback and stuff, we would like to see the supervisors copied in.
So these are really important issues. And at USC, the supervisor or the advisor is the chief investigator. Students, because students come and go, even though they probably are taking on the role as a chief investigator, the one with ultimate responsibility is the supervisor. So that makes Angela's point even more pertinent. The peer review is also extremely important because it is someone in your discipline, and remember there's lots of different disciplines across the university, who is giving feedback on this project. So it's about the integrity of the research itself, and it's about whether this is a research question, whether this research has significance, all those really foundational important questions, which is actually 1.1 of the national statement. Now, ATRECs have the responsibility to make sure, when they're approving projects, that the research has integrity and, as Angela said, has merit and integrity. It is much easier for a human research ethics committee if there is a robust, solid peer review from an academic within the discipline who has said that this is good research that's significant. And so that's why we have peer reviews. It takes the pressure, if you like, of the ATREC to judge whether this is good research or not, because you've already got someone in a peer review position saying it is. So it reassures us. So that's the reason for it. Not all committees do it. We do it here. And like most committees, we require the CIs to be the supervisors. for obvious reasons. Students come and go, but you need to have a staff member who's around to take responsibility. But the peer review is a really important part of the whole project. We've recently, Angela has changed the peer review in consultation with the committee, the form, and we actually do require peer reviewers, not just a tick box, but to actually make a statement about each particular characteristic of the project. And that's been really helpful for the committee. The last thing I want to say on this, because it's a really important issue, is peer review is done differently across the university. And I guess pressure of numbers and pressure of numbers of research and so on, sometimes people who are in dependent relationships with a senior researcher, for example, are doing the peer review, and the committee has had a discussion about that. There was an instance in one area where a level A academic was doing all the peer reviews for all the professors and associate professors and senior lecturers and so on, and that's a red flag. Peer reviews need to be done with integrity because they're so important. And in the end, regardless of what the ATREC says, that's your research area there, and the integrity of your own research is what is foundationally important. So I'm glad you asked that question. It's a really significant thing. Yeah, really good question. And an important peer review is really important in the academic world, as people know.
I have another question.
Sorry.
Sorry, I hope I'm not hogging the question time, but there's things just buzzing around in my head as you're both talking. But thinking about, okay, you've got a timeline, and my goal is to start data collection at this time, and so I need to get that ethics approval in before I obviously conduct that research. What is a good timeline of how far in advance we should be planning to get this ethics approved, in regards to the time between when we actually want to start collecting data?
I would say it varies.
Yeah.
It does vary depending on the sort of research you're doing and so on. The ethics application shouldn't drive your research question. Your research question is everything, really. Making sure you've got a good research question, and as I said before, it has significance. It's going to contribute to the field. And if you're doing a PhD, it is meant to be something that is going to contribute something new to the area, as you know. So that's why I think protocols, and that is really significant early on. Now, if you get that right, you're going to have ethics is going to be embedded in there anyway, in integrity. And so the ethics application process should be relatively straightforward. Where some students and even some experienced researchers can go wrong is when they try and develop a research project from an ethics application. That's a no-no. That's guaranteed failure. Start from, thinking about the question you want to answer, and with your peers, and that's your peer review and all that process. Your grant funding and all that sort of stuff. Conversations with your advisors, your supervisors, your friends, colleagues, and so on. So the ethics application should happen early on, obviously, but it shouldn't be the first thing you do, I don't think. Now, people may have different views on that, but that's just my view. Do you have a view, Angela?
Oh, I was going to say, from a strictly how long from putting it into us to getting approval at a very basic level.
Yeah.
With a low risk application, we can often turn those around in 2 weeks. If we get a complete application, everyone's responsive. I'd allow a bit more. With your ones that would need to go to the committee, or the maybe borderline ones, we've got the dates there. So after the committee, you'd get your feedback a week later, and then most application feedback responses can be looked at between meetings, so it's not going to have to go back to another meeting. But we do, I feel like we've had a few more this year, like maybe one per meeting, that it needs so much work that it has to go back to a second meeting, because particularly the committee is very conservative about consent. And if they're feeling like the consent's not right, it will probably go back to another meeting.
Yeah.
So I'd say if it's a higher risk, I'd say probably allow yourself a couple months, 2 or 3 months. But if it's definitely low risk, maybe aim for a month ahead of when you want.
Yeah.
The other tricky thing is what's high risk or low risk, because a lot of people, most people think their applications are low risk. And then we get it and we think, well, there's a few things there. We're going to bump this up to the committee. So
Yeah.
if you're not sure, give us a call. We can often chat it out and sort of work out ahead of time.
Yeah, thanks, Angela. That's good to know. I guess I've now thought of something else, thinking about time, and many of us work internationally with our research. And I know in 2020, I was on a research project working in a country in the Pacific Islands, and we did the ethics application, but then COVID hit and everything changed. Our methods completely changed. Some of the, goals of the project, the research aims even changed based on, okay, now we've got to kind of change this to suit this new situation. So I guess, we made amendments and we got in touch with research and we amended our ethics application. So I guess for people who maybe haven't gone through that ethics process before, who are here today, it's safe to say that you can amend and change your project as you go, or get extended time on the period that it's sort of been validated for. Yeah.
And if you do change your protocol, you really need to let the committee know. So amendments. And we can turn an amendment around really quickly.
Just so you don't get into trouble later on down the track. Well, how come it's different to what you originally planned for? And I guess in that time frame for us with approving ethics through USC, it was quite quick, but in the particular country that we were wanting to do research in, we also had to have ethics approved for that country as well. And that took quite a bit longer, especially because there was all the kind of red tape around what was going on with COVID at the time as well. So even though, from my experience, it was quite quick here, but it can be different in different settings as well.
Yeah, that's important. We're actually very quick here. And as I say, even though, as Angela says, the committee can be conservative on consent. Remember, only the higher risk projects are going to the committee. So 90% of the research at this place isn't going to that committee. So we're seeing the ones where there is, high risk. Amendments, do them. While you were talking, I thought of another thing. When something goes wrong, just ring Angela and let us know. Because sometimes we can help. And if things go wrong and you don't let us know, then you really are on your own, and you're required to let us know if something does go wrong. And it does sometimes, you might get a complaint, or you do something, you mess up a little bit, but as long as you let us know, it can be fixed. There's a solution to everything, as you know.
And sometimes the solution is an amendment.
Exactly.
Change your method slightly. Most amendments we look at in the office in a few days. Sometimes an amendment will have to go back to the committee. If you're adding a vulnerable group, or you're, making quite a substantial change, we look at an amendment as does it add risk? If not, we can do it in the office. If it adds risks, then we might bump it up. Sometimes just Andrew will look at it, and sometimes the committee will look at it.
And we can go to a panel sometimes rather than go to the full committee. So we have pathways and processes what the office does, which are really effective. So USC is, I think, doing a reasonable job in getting research approved in a timely manner. And we rarely have things go wrong. We do, like anywhere, things do go wrong, but it's not common here.
Usually quite minor if things do.
We had a comment from Matt already, but it was a while ago when we were talking about communication. I think they were just maybe asking whether an effective communication strategy will be required to engage with groups. So do you need to actually specify communication strategies in your project description protocol or any of the documents? I guess you'd include that as part of your, when you're talking about your interviews or the type of interviews you're doing, maybe.
Yeah, and also in the end, reporting results back to communities. You know, most researchers do that. Sometimes they overlook at that. You know, de-identified report, as well as publishing, which is, you know, what all of us academics want. But as well as that, you know, reporting the findings back to communities. So, you know, I think that's a really significant part of communication, as well as the sentiments that I think are expressed in the chat. You know, having effective communication strategies is everything, isn't it? Really? Yeah.
Actually, just right at the beginning, we were messaging. I was messaging a couple of the people that had attended, because I know that they can't access the student portal, but they were still interested in having a look at the documents. So some of them have access to certain sections of USC's like they can access our library and things like that, but they aren't actually USC students. They're FNU students, so they don't have access. So is it possible to give them copies of the actual PDF documents? I know Angela put the link for the student portal in, but you know, so they can have a look at our actual templates as a guide for, I mean, obviously they might have slightly different.
I mean, the text from the applying page, we could just copy and paste into an email, most likely, I would think. And then, yeah, we could just attach all the templates.
Yeah.
Do you want to send me an email and remind me to do that next week?
Yeah.
I'm
going to say, Angela, we might also be able to, if we can, just pop together an email. We can copy and paste that information from the student portal with the links to those documents and send it out to everyone. Save you doing it if that's easier.
Yeah, if that works for you, but yeah, let me know if I can do anything to help.
Need your help. Awesome, thank you. Well, we'll definitely send that out to everyone who attended from Pacific universities. Well, I think
just one final comment. Always feel free to give me a call. I'm Monday to Friday, and the other person in the office at the moment is Mick Ashton.
Okay.
And in a few months' time, my coworker Claire will be back from maternity leave. Sometimes people email us and say, can we set up a meeting? And we, not to try and fob you off at all, but we just say, give us a call, because, you know, often we can help you in a 10-minute phone call. You know, we don't need to necessarily set up meetings. We're happy to do that if it's a complex issue, but yeah, we're always here to answer questions.
Yeah, great, Angela. That's good to know. I definitely find it easier sometimes to just talk through my questions with people as well. Sometimes I can't quite articulate it in an email.
Yeah. It can help us too. Sometimes I'll call a researcher and say, I've read your project, and can I just confirm my interpretation of it is correct? Because it's a lot of documents sometimes, and everyone writes differently and everyone understands differently. So
yeah, especially when we're all coming from different disciplines as well.
Yeah, and countries perhaps.
Yeah, exactly. Well, there's lots of thank yous in the chat. I feel like I've taken up a lot of time asking questions, so I will put it out there if there's any final questions that anyone wanted to ask before we do finish the session.
Can I say one more thing?
Yeah.
There's a bit of activity happening in the Indigenous research space, and I think there's going to be a workshop that you'll see advertised relatively soon with some Indigenous researchers, some Indigenous people, maybe some people from the ethics committee and other researchers and so on. So keep your eye out for that. That should be good.
Yeah, great. Do you also often have, I mean, you may know if the university has sort of cultural training type sessions as well for HDR students in that kind of preparation for planning, you know, sort of what we've talked about, that in community engagement strategies within our research?
We actually talked about this at our last meeting, and we're kind of wondering the same thing. So that's, I can investigate.
Yeah, I think that is I think that is happening. I think the DVCR is working towards getting some of that happening with, you know, some Indigenous people around the place.
I know that ACPIR talked about doing a session. But that was Pacific Island focused, but I guess it would be better to, I mean, I think they're holding it at a community area in Deception Bay, was it somewhere like that? It's run by a sort of a Pacific Island group.
Was it with the Pacific Island Student Association?
No, we're working with Moreton Bay Regional Council and the Pacifica families and the Iaga Samoa community in Deception Bay. And we're going to hold it at their Motofono Community Hall, and it's going to be in October. That's mainly for our centre people, like students and staff and researchers, and also 20 other members of the community, people that work with Pacific Island people. So,
Sounds great.
It'll be a whole day, and we're going to. That'll be the first one, and then we're talking about running more, say, research focused, targeted ones as well, and bringing in other people, researchers from the Pacific and academics and people from the community to help with that. So watch this space.
Sounds good.
Yeah, that'll be good, Inez. Well, anyway, some food for thought for USC, at least in regards to working in Indigenous populations here. But all right. Well, I guess I can see a couple of people have left, so I'm sure they've got their questions answered and they're ready to move on to other things. So thank you so much for your time today, Angela and Andrew. I know, Angela, you're on leave at the moment, so we do really appreciate that.
That's okay. That was my silly scheduling.
It's hard to work out our schedules sometimes. But thank you so much. It was a really informative session. I don't know if you got a chance to see any of the comments, but there were lots of
I've seen a few.
Yes. Thank you very much for inviting us.
Thanks.
Thanks for coming.
Okay.
Thanks,
See you
everyone.
next time, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.